Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackman, Saturday Down South. On this episode, we will preview the 2025-2026 Florida Gators. For all our podcast listeners, Fawcett can't be here. He's got a bachelor party for his brother. So awesome for Fawcett. Congrats to his brother. Hope that is awesome. He will be back for a show coming soon. He also did a preview of the Arizona game. I will talk about the Arizona game a little bit here, but not nearly in the detail that we have it in two different previews at the Patreon. If you're new to Florida Basketball Hour, a lot of the content we produce is behind a paywall at a Patreon, patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour. Make sure you go over there and check out our work. If you want to support us, people always listen to us. They give us a lot of compliments, a lot of praise, send us DMs, criticism, all of that. But in the end, I think people want to support the podcast. And they say, hey, Neil, how can I support the podcast? And the reality is that there's really two ways to do it. You can hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Florida Basketball Hour, or better than that, you can subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/FloridaBB Hour. There's three different membership tiers. Your top tier is your six-man club tier. You're going to get everything, unique film studies, interviews, extra content, game previews. Your Game Day Gators are going to get all your game previews and recaps. If that's, if you have a person that drops in during the season, doesn't need necessarily the deep dive some of the other fans want, then that might be the tier for you. And then your second tier is the Rowdy Reptile tier. You're going to get a lot of stuff there. We also hook people up with different deals, things like this Breaking T-shirt I'm wearing that has Florida's 3 banners on it. Nice partners over at Breaking T. So a lot of different people that can help us, that help make this show happen. But really, we're listener supported. So the Patreon is the best way to help keep making this show happen. And we thank you for thinking about subscribing. Okay, man, it just feels like it was yesterday, not 7 months ago, that Florida won its third national championship in basketball. Alex Condon diving for that ball on the floor after the Walter Clayton closeout. And the Gators rally and beat Houston to capture the national title. And now what's won is done, man. It's time to get out there and start a new season and compete and see what this team could be. I think the pieces are certainly in place for Florida to be right in the mix to go back to the Final Four. To do that, of course, you got to get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. I always tell people, if you can get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, really anything can happen. Anything can happen. If you can win 2 games on one weekend, you're back in the Final Four. I think Florida has all the pieces you need to get back to the Final Four. If I were going to kind of start somewhere where if we start a season preview with the strength of the team, obviously I think we'd be talking about the front court and player retention. If we started the preview with what they did in the transfer portal, we'd be starting with the backcourt because Florida had to replace what, at least according to metrics, according to the analytics that inform the sport of college basketball now, and a lot of other sports, but in basketball, obviously we've had this big shift, particularly in the SEC since the arrival of Nate Oates, but even before that with Billy Donovan and his innovative staff, Mark Gastineau, the people that were on the late staffs at Florida, kind of making it more a metrics-based game, making it a sort of more metrics-based analytical operation. The reality is that Florida is replacing what, under almost any analytical model, whether it's KenPom, whether it is, you want to look at Torvik, whether you like the guys at Evan Mia, there's a lot of different good analytic programs to look at, but Florida is replacing the best backcourt in SEC history. The most productive backcourt group in the history of Southeastern Conference basketball played at the University of Florida last year. Walter Clayton Jr. now with the Jazz. Will Richard shining early in his NBA tenure with the Warriors, getting praise from Steph Curry at press conferences, getting praise from Steve Kerr, getting praise from Jimmy Butler, doing all the little things he did to impact winning. Elijah Martin, a culture changer, the guy who kind of came in and embraced the underdog, status for the University of Florida, embraced last year's sort of underdog legacy that they left behind, and said, look, none of us really, even Coach Golden, are supposed to be at a place like Florida. We think that that's okay. And here's what we think we can accomplish at UF. And then they went out and did it. And then Denzel Aberdeen, right? No conversation of Florida's backcourt last year should not include Zell. Zell obviously did an incredible job playing for Walt when Walt was hurt, playing for Elijah Martin when Elijah Martin was hurt. I will never forget the thunderous ovation that Zell got when he first started game in Florida 3 years into his career, because injuries forced him to, and played fantastic. And then, in the national title game, Denzel Aberdeen's a guy who's on the floor in the final 5 minutes of the game. So gives you an idea of how much the staff trusted him and believed in him. Todd Golden said repeatedly that Denzel Aberdeen would be a starter on the team next year, that he'd be a leader on the team next year. Denzel didn't leave because of role. He didn't leave because there weren't relationships. He left because of money, right? He got more money from Kentucky. They threw a huge bag at him, and Denzel, smartly, I think, given kind of the unlikelihood that he becomes an NBA-type player, he made the choice to go and play for Kentucky. Does it suck that he's going to play for an arch rival? Yeah. Are we going to, knock the guy for making a decision almost any of us would have made? No. Is Florida going to boo his ass off on Valentine's Day when he comes to the O'Connell Center? Yeah. Does Florida want to go up to Rupp and spoil his senior night now? Yeah. But Denzel Aberdeen made a huge basket in the national title game against Houston when Florida was down 11, kind of sparked the Florida run. And I think, sorry, the printer's going off. But anyway, that's what that background noise is, and I apologize. The reality is that this is the best backcourt in the history of college, or the history of SEC basketball, that Florida is now replacing. And the path forward has to start somewhere new. So Florida went into the portal and they landed what Evan Mia ranked as a top 5 portal transfer class, right? They got Xavier Lee, the all-time assist leader at Princeton, where they run an offense kind of designed to be assist-oriented, to be helper-oriented. And then they got Boogie Flan, a former McDonald's All-American 5-star recruit from Arkansas, who no matter what the narrative is in Fayetteville, and there are lots of them, you can see him on Twitter if you type in Boogie Flan. He wasn't surplus to requirements in Fayetteville at all. He was a guy that they would have relied on this year. He made them better defensively. I'll get into that. And he was having the best season for a freshman point guard since Nico Mannion in 2020, which gives you an idea, because Nico, obviously in the NBA, gives you an idea just how productive Boogie actually was. Because there's this narratives rule the day in the era of social media. And there's this narrative that Flan wasn't particularly great because Arkansas was 0-5, and then Flan got hurt, and then Arkansas improved. They finished 8-10 in the SEC. So they went 8-5 without Flan down the stretch, got a couple quality wins, got a nice seed given what they really did in the non-conference, which Flan had a lot to do with, by the way. And then got to the Sweet 16. Well, Boogie played in the NCAA tournament. Now, he wasn't great in the Sweet 16 game against Texas Tech, but he was spectacular against Kansas. John Calipari said, quote, "We don't win that game without Boogie. His defense was electric for us." So, end quote. So, like, Cal post-game praised Flan. I mean, these narratives about Boogie in terms of his performance and production in Arkansas are wrong, but he only played 20 games there is the reality. So, he's a young sophomore. He's young in age. He's young in experience. And he's now stepping in to replace the best single-season point guard in the history of Florida basketball, in Walter Clayton Jr. And Florida has to replace that backcourt. It's going to be tough, right? That was one of the things that I brought up at SEC Media Days to Todd Golden. I asked him, it's not really fair to compare these guys to Walt, to Will, to Elijah. And that's what Todd said. He said, yeah, you're right. It's not. But I asked him, what do you like about these guys in his own right? And Todd said, I love them. I love how they compete. He's been very pleased with their competitiveness. They want to be good players. They are both really electric as playmakers. So I think if you want to know something that they had that maybe the last year's backcourt didn't have as much. Now, Denzel wasn't afraid to get into the paint and make a play. But in terms of two creative playmakers, no. Like Florida had Walt last year as a creative playmaker. And maybe, they never really got to the point with Urban Clavsar because he arrived late and he didn't get to play enough in the non-conference. Urban was a guy who could do that, right? Profiled like that, coming over from Murcia in Spain. As a good player who could create off the dribble. But realistically, Florida has 4 guys on this team who can create their own shot off the bounce. Well, last year, you weren't putting Elijah Martin in isolation and saying, go cook, young man. In fact, when Florida put Elijah Martin in sort of isolation or even pick and roll situations and asked him to create off the bounce, things didn't go awesome, right? Elijah was great at straight line drives off those gut dribble handoffs, zoom actions, and he was great at being a guy who could, get open off a screen and make a shot. And that's what he was really good at, right? And then all the other intangible stuff in his defense, finishing, top 5 in the SEC in defensive win shares, top 10 in the country in defensive win shares. I mean, on the defensive end, Elijah put his money where his mouth was, and the data proves it. But, offensively, this wasn't a creator, okay? So there are differences, and there are things that this backcourt does better than maybe last year, but Florida still had the best shot maker in the sport last year in Walt Clayton, right? And if you don't think he's the best shot maker, that's fine, but there's an NCAA tournament tape that suggests that he probably was, right? So, I would remind people that because of this front court that's coming back, Florida and Will Richard, Florida stayed in the national title game last year when Walt had no points and went to the bench with, I think, 2 with 14 minutes to go. Somebody is going to correct me, and that's okay. But, if I'm wrong. But it was only a couple points. He got to the free throw line, finally scored. But when he went to the bench, it was Denzel Aberdeen who came in, made a tough shot, and then Florida gets a stop. Elijah Martin had to hit a step-back 3. That was a huge shot. But, Elijah last season for the Gators, very good in every possible way, shot 226 threes, shot 35%. So keep that number in mind when you kind of evaluate what you want from Fland and what you want from Lee. Walt shot 38.6. He made 117 threes. Florida's not going to have a guy that takes 300 this year. I think they're going to be more spread out in terms of who shoots the threes for them. I'll get to some of that. Will Richard took 223. He shot 35.9. So Florida ends up having 3 guys who shoot 35% or higher from 3. Urban Clavsar was 17 of 50. So he actually shot 34%, but he was much better an SEC player. Remember, Urban missed his first 13 college threes, and then I think finished 17 to 37, was very good in league play in that regard, but didn't play much in the NCAA tournament because of his defense. So defensively and from a physicality standpoint are the 2 bigger questions with this new backcourt group. I want to get into that aspect of it in a second, but I've addressed the playmaking and how it can be better with this backcourt group. Xavion Lee is a guy who has gotten a lot of, what do you say? He's been dissected. He's been dissected in the national narratives, right? The narratives really are twofold. One, he wasn't the most spectacularly efficient player at Princeton. All right, that's narrative 1. His offensive rating was 113. Super high usage, took a ton of shots. They played a lot of iso ball. Spread out, let Xavion cook. His bag is huge. Walt had a big bag, Xavion big bag, right? That said, his assist rate, super high, 19th in the country in assist rate, right? 36.8, higher than anybody on Florida by some distance. What does that mean? Did he take a lot of threes? No, he took 157. So that's half the threes that Walt took. Did he shoot well? Yeah, shot 37%. So not uber efficient because of his finishing on twos, 48%. A little better than Boogie Flan. But I think the questions with Xavier have been, is he a really efficient dude? No. And then what's that leap look like from the Ivy League to the SEC? And he only has the 1 year to do it, right? Walt had 2. But Walt was an all-SEC player in his first year coming over from a league much worse than the Ivy League, right? Walt came over from the Metro Atlantic. The Ivy League a season ago was 14th, all right? So the Metro Atlantic, this is in KenPom, the Metro Atlantic was 25th, all right? So it gives you an idea. Like, the Ivy League was a good basketball league last year, okay? It was 14th, which actually is kind of low for the Ivy League. But if you look at, 2023, that's a year that Walt Clayton was at Iona. Iona still, even with a Rick Pitino team at Iona, they were 23rd in the Metro Atlantic, right? And the Ivy League was 12th, just behind the WAC and Conference USA. So the point is, like, it's a jump, but it's not the jump that Janai Broome made. It's not the jump that Denver Jones made. It's not the jump that Walter Clayton made, right? Those guys all took bigger jumps, right? It's a little more akin to the jump that, well, actually, it's not the jump Mark Sears made. Mark Sears' jump was bigger, right? Coming over from Ohio. So the point is, like, I think you can look at this stuff kind of fairly and have some questions about Xavier Lee's ability to adjust to the physicality and the level of the SEC. And that's fair, and I'll get to physicality, I promise. But I don't think it's fair to say that he's just naturally not going to be able to take that step to the next level. And one really lazy piece of journalism I've seen is this idea that he hasn't been productive against good teams, which is just not true. Xavier had plenty of good games. I shouldn't say plenty. When on the rare occasion that Princeton played someone that was good, there wasn't anything wrong with the way that Xavier Lee played. I think people point to a Loyola Chicago game where he wasn't terribly efficient, and maybe that's like a little bit of that criticism. But like, they played St. Joe's, who had an NBA, I think the guy that was picked 31st on their roster last year, right, in the NBA draft. And had Xavier Brown, who was one of the coveted guards in the portal. And Xavier Lee was the best player on the floor, right? He had 18 points, shot 6 of 11 from the field, got to the free throw line, dished out 11 assists, had 2 turnovers, had 11 rebounds, triple-double, just a casual triple-double against St. Joe's. They played Furman, who I think remains one of the better coach teams in the sport under Bob Rischi. And, did they win? No. But there was Xavier Lee. It was 16-6-6. So, like, I know Furman and St. Joe's aren't SEC caliber opponents, but when you kind of look at those games, you can see that he took, quote unquote, steps up in competition against more athletic programs, and he was fine. Did he play well in the scrimmages? Yeah, I mean, he dominated against Illinois. Was fantastic, arguably the best player on the floor in that game, not named Alex Condon, who went for the cool 24, 11, and 5. But like, Xavier was great, man. Controlled the tempo, made shots, created for his teammates. Absolute dog out there. So the step-up competition argument falls a little flat for me with Xavier Lee. Like, that criticism I don't like as much. I think Xavier's about 6'3.5". I know he was listed at 6'4" at Princeton. I don't think he's that height. I'm 6'1". Xavier's a little taller than me. I know, really anecdotal, kind of horrid comparison. But if he's 6'4", I'm surprised. He has put on 10 pounds since he got to Florida. The question with me for Xavier, and the question with me for Florida's backcourt really is, like, are they there physically? Like, how do they hold up physically over the 18-game challenge that is the SEC and then this schedule that Todd Golden and Jonathan Safire put together, and Carlin Hartman and this Florida staff, where unlike last year, like Florida's really challenging themselves in the non-con, man. They got Arizona. They got Arizona opening night tomorrow, but they're going to play Miami, who I think is going to be sneaky good, 2 weeks after Arizona. They're going to play TCU out in San Diego. Jamie Dixon's team's going to guard their ass off and play good. Jamie Dixon's one of the best coaches in the sport at getting every ounce out of his talent. They might get Wisconsin in that tournament. And then they go Duke, UConn, right? And then, oh, by the way, they're playing Colgate on December 21st. And, like, if you're going to play a mid-major team that runs awesome stuff and is going to score on you, it's Colgate. So, like, even in their, like, mid-major games, they're going to get pushed a little bit. And then they've got SEC play, right? And right away it's Ant Robinson and Mizzou. And, like, there's no Elijah Martin, who's that guy who in the dog days of February is the toughest son of a you-know-what on the court, right? Those are the dudes that you wonder about. There's no Will Richard, who's been through all those wars, to just drop 30 on a night when it looks like you're getting embarrassed in Athens. Like, who's that dog that when you get hit in the mouth, who's the guy in that backcourt that's like, not tonight, not tonight. You know, what do you say to the god of death? Not today. So that's the question for me. It's the physicality piece, and that extends to March, right? Like, what wins in March? If everybody says guard play wins in March, it's true. It's true. But it's physical guard play more than any other, like, kind of – you have to have the physicality to win all different types of games in March, you know? Does Florida's backcourt, did they replace their dogs with guys who can actually do that? Maybe. You know, I think it's possible. Now, that said, I don't want to – and Fawcett and I have talked about this a lot in text. And, like, we were chatting about it the other day. And, like, you look at the first title team from UConn, right? And it didn't look the same as the second one, you know? Because everybody's like, oh, can Florida repeat? And, like, we should embrace that question, you know, but you have to get to the second weekend to repeat. And I really feel like the first discussion for this Florida team is, can they compete for an SEC championship, something that hadn't been done here in 11 years, and then a regular season title. And then can they get to the second weekend? Well, you know, UConn had Jordan Hawkins, who took a ton of their shots, 27.4% of the shots when he was on the floor, gone, right? 6'5", wing. Will Richardy shot better, but Will Richardy did everything. Adama Sanogo, a top 10 player in the sport, right? And Andre Jackson, another guy that kind of wasn't a great shooter, but helped them on the glass, an excellent passer, just somebody that could eat up minutes, tough, kind of zealous, but probably, you know, I don't know, that's probably decent in terms of, like, what his role was, right? And they lost those three pieces, okay? So I don't know if that's quite Clayton, Richard, and Martin, but it's pretty damn close, especially with Hawkins and Sanogo. Might even be better 1-2 than, like, Will or Elijah, and then obviously Walt. So the question I have is, like, well, what did Dan Hurley go and do? Well, Dan Hurley, you know, went and he got Cam Spencer, and people said, oh, I don't know, man. Cam Spencer, how's he adjust to the physicality night in, night out? You know, is Cam Spencer can he handle the step up? Well, he had shown it at Rutgers, right? So there's a little bit of a difference there. But he started at Loyola Maryland, right? And nobody was afraid of, like, Cam Spencer athletically. But he filled in that role. Like, he went out and made shots, and it was like Jordan Hawkins didn't even matter. And then they got Stephon Castle, a superstar freshman, and he embraced a role, right? I'll get to that, right? So, and then Alex Karabin took a step up. And then Tristan Newton, like, who's going to be your top 10 player? Well, guess what? It turned out it was Tristan Newton, who took a step from the year before and led that backcourt. So, you know, I think the point is, like, if the idea was that they're going to be a wildly different team. I mean, they are, but realistically, the second UConn team, they did the same stuff. Like, they crushed you on the glass. They shot 35.8% from three, which was almost as good as the year before. They defended the three at a top 10 level because of their length, because of their athleticism. And, they were able to get back to the second weekend. They challenged themselves at the non-conference. Maybe not quite as much as Florida is, but pretty close. And then, they lost a couple games in league play, but, and not quite as good a league as the SEC. But by March, they were ready, man. Like, that backcourt was ready to go. So, I think if you're kind of evaluating where Florida is, I don't know. I think the restructure and rebuild of the roster makes a lot of sense. The questions really are, about that backcourt, because there aren't really front court questions. Now, Boogie Fland is interesting in that respect because of the injury and because of the narratives. I've talked a little about the narratives. First of all, elite defender, guy I think is going to compete for SEC Defensive Player of the Year. Arkansas was 6th in Torvik defense when Fland went out. They finished 17th, so there was a drop-off without Boogie. Obviously, he came in, had 3 steals in the Kansas game in the second half. That was massive. When you look at Boogie's deeper dive into his analytics, and it's pretty interesting. Like, he's in the 97th percentile last year in assists per game, 6.5 per 40 minutes, 77th in points per game. So it's like, okay, those are pretty good. His usage percentage at 23.3 was not uber high, but not necessarily like low, right? Like, if you look at, let's look at Walt. So if you look at Walt Clayton's usage last year, and keep in mind, Walt was the main playmaker, okay? So Walt was 24.8, so higher than Fland, right? But Fland, I wouldn't be stunned if Fland's at 23.3 again this year. Maybe a little bit higher, but he's going to be on the floor with Lee a lot. So he can defer some, and I think they can get more efficiency out of him that way. The big questions for me with, like, Boogie, because his assist percentage was 28.6. That's 95th percentile. These are all as a freshman. His turnover percentage was 9.3% per 40. That's 86th percentile. And by the way, in those first 5 games of SEC play, it was even lower, 4.8. That was in the 94th percentile. So he wasn't turning the ball over in league play. Get out of here with that narrative, right? Some of these are just some of this stuff is just so narrative driven. Like, his usage percentage versus true shooting percentage was almost as good as Walter Clayton's. It was a 50.2% true shooting percentage. Okay. Now, there were players that were better, like Todd Pettiford is a great example. 26% usage, 54% shooting percentage. So, Walt Clayton's 25.6% usage, 60.7 shooting percentage. So, actually substantially better than Boogie Fland. But the point is, Boogie was still in the top 25 in the SEC in that. The question with Fland, I think, if you're going to go, hey, where can Boogie improve, right? It's as a finisher in the paint. He only got 23.3% of his points in the paint, and that's because he shot 40.5% on rim twos. Like, that's got to improve. But again, like, the way that Florida seals, the way that Florida plays, the way that they get the ball to guards in advantageous ways is a little different than the spread it out, ISO ball, dribble drive plus stuff that John Calipari runs. I use runs in air quotes because it's fair now. It's just known, he's going to be in a better system. He's going to be built better to succeed offensively. And he's a playmaker anyway. Talking about a guy who was the second best player on the floor in the McDonald's All-American game with Cooper Flagg. Like, this is a big-time talent. Now, can he handle sort of, being the dude? Well, he was kind of the dude at Arkansas based on what Cal wanted to do. And his net rating was 15.3. That's still in the 93rd percentile in the sport, right? His offensive rating of 113, not elite. You'd like that to be better, but I still feel like they're a team, right, that didn't necessarily get drastically better without him, except that they got better around him without him. Jonell Davis started to make shots. Carter Knox stopped playing like a freshman. They used Billy Richmond more as a defensive, asset, and they just did better things around him when he was gone because they were forced to adapt. And sometimes that's good. Doesn't mean that they, Flan's an easy scapegoat because things started poorly, but a lot of that stuff, not real fair to Boogie Flan. So that's kind of where I'm at with that backcourt. Two guys that I got to mention if I'm doing a Florida basketball preview are Alex Lloyd, who I think is just a walking bucket. You're going to love him. I think he'll play 10 to 15 minutes by March. He can shoot. He can score at all three levels. He's got a really good quick burst. He's got a nice innate ability to get where he wants on the floor. And I think he's more tough than he gets credit for. He won 3 straight Peach Jams. He's a winner. And he played a really tough schedule down at Westminster Academy in Fort Lauderdale. And then with Knight Riders, was always playing elite teams. Alex is a guy, right, who's been challenged. He's played with the Boozers. He's played with Alex Constanza, top 10 recruit in the coming class. He's unbothered is a great word for Alex Lloyd. Like, he's going to move on to the next play. He's not going to shrug his shoulders. Love the fit culturally. Not saying that him or CJ Ingram or Stephon Castle type impact guys like UConn got when they got him in their repeat year. But I do think most programs that land 2 top 50 freshmen, they get talked about a lot. At Florida, these guys don't have to be talked about a lot because they don't have to be relied on as much, but they're both going to embrace the role that they're going to be assigned, right? And for Alex, it's going to be go get buckets. Be an extra guard off the bench who's a bucket maker. Right, and if you throw that in with Urban Klausar, who was 9 of 15 from 3 in scrimmages, and who is creative on the ball, and I still think more comfortable with the ball than off of it. But Urban told me, "Hey man, I really do feel like I'm getting better off the ball. Like I had to adjust to the physicality of screening and stuff in the SEC. It's different than where I came from, but it wasn't like it was the first time I'd been off the ball a lot." And I'm glad that Urban corrected the premise of the question because, first of all, I love that about a player. But second of all, it was cool to hear that confidence. And then to have him go out and play great in the 2 scrimmages has to give Florida confidence because it means that Alex can kind of continue. Like, he doesn't have to be the first guard option off the bench to score, which is great. But I think they have 4 solid options there without even talking about what they get from Zay Brown at the 3. I do think A.J. Brown is a guy who's going to have a small role, if any. Coming off the surgery, Zay is the guy that if they had another player that I thought would be impactful, it's him. Again, another guy who was the highest recruited player on the team last year based on recruiting rankings. The staff continues to be very high on him. They think he's going to develop into something special. He's a hard worker. They'd like to see him elevate his defense a little bit more with his athleticism. He should be better in terms of guarding, and he's not quite there yet. And CJ is such an elite athlete, the best athlete that one staffer said he's the best natural athlete I've ever coached. Another staffer said that him and Fland are the best defenders he's coached in many years, which gives you an idea kind of the ceiling of this team, I think, defensively, and why I think it's higher than last year, where Florida was real good in their shell defense, but maybe not as disruptive a defense. Florida they weren't necessarily turning you over a ton last season, okay? Their idea was we're going to get stops. We're going to prevent rim twos with our rim protectors. I think Florida finished 19th in the country rim protection defense. They finished 5th in the country in 3-point defense. That's what I mean by their shell defense was good. Their rotations were good. They kept the ball in front of them. Florida struggled with straight line drives in the scrimmages, particularly without Fland. Keep an eye on that tomorrow. and early in the season. Just kind of see what Florida has to do to keep drivers in front of them. They can funnel them to rim help, but at some point you have to keep people out of the paint a little bit better too. That could be the kind of bugaboo for this defense. We'll see. But they weren't turning people over a lot. Only a 16.6% turnover percentage. That was in the 200s. I think they'll be in the top 100 in that this year with Ingram and with Flan's ability to be disruptive on the ball, with Tommy Houck playing in the passing lanes out at the 3 a little more. I think the potential is there for Florida to be super productive as a disruptive defense, in addition to being okay in their shell, maybe not quite as good because of the physicality piece, right? Straight line drivers. Does that end up being a killer for Florida? We'll see. When they play teams with big physical guards, what happens? Are they ready for that fight? I don't know. I mean, Alex Lloyd and Urban Klabsar aren't necessarily going to be. So Xavier Lee might not be. Like, Boogie Flan's got to use his quickness to keep people in front and funnel them towards help. That's a challenge. We'll see. But that's a good backcourt wrap. I touched on Zay Brown. I think he can shoot too. We'll see if he can carve out a role. He's going to have the opportunity. They held Lloyd out of the scrimmage, held Boogie out, held Zay out, AJ out. So people were held out of the Illinois scrimmage. They really trimmed down the rotation super tight. It'll be interesting to see what the minutes distribution looks like early in the season. Not just Arizona tomorrow, where I think you slim down your rotation if you have to win the game, but North Florida. What does it look like for the Gators kind of in their bye games? Like, North Florida, do you go and get Zay Brown minutes against Florida State because you're probably going to be in control of that game? Right? I think they will. I think those are games where Alex Lloyd, Zay, you might pick and choose minutes. Maybe you could do that against Miami too, although I think Miami's talented and is really going to guard, so that'll be interesting. But, that's where they're at backcourt-wise. Okay, front court. Preseason All-American Alex Condon, and he might not be the best guy in their front court. Here's some fun stuff on Tommy Houck. So there's a stat called regularized adjusted plus minus, which is an all-in-one metric that considers on-court play-by-play impact of a player, right? And it's interpreted as the impact on point differential per 100 possessions above your league average. So you take the SEC average on point differential per 100 possessions, and then you just rank players. It's very similar to an NBA stat called the EPM or the LeBron. Tommy Houck was the 7th best player in the country in that stat last year, in the 100th percentile. 8.7 point differential per 100 minutes. Just fantastic. Elite. Offensive win shares, 99th percentile. Defensive win shares. So this is fascinating to me because there's this, I don't know how's he going to adjust? 90th percentile. So a high-level defensive win share guy, great finisher at the rim, elite free throw shooter. Now he's going to be coming off screens. He was told to work on the consistency of his jump shot, went out to California, worked with VG Edgecombe and a bunch of guys out there at shooting and getting better. We've seen it pay off for VJ in the NBA early. I think it could for Tommy. Didn't shoot it great against Illinois, but still played pretty well, stuffed the stat sheet, looked comfortable defensively and offensively at the 3. I think they get a huge season for Tommy Houck. I put him on the Florida Basketball Hour first team All-SEC ballot. We will see if I look foolish for that. I don't think I will. I think he's going to be an All-American candidate. I think he's sneaky, arguably one of the most underrated players in college basketball still. Like, I heard Rob Doster, and I like Rob, But when I heard Rob Doster and John Fanta, and I think Fanta's incredible. I think Doster's great. When I heard them say that Florida was one of them said, I think they're a top 15, they're not a top 17. I said, what? Like, you don't think a team with Tommy Houck and Alex Condon and Boogie Flan is a top 17? You don't think they're a top 17? Like, I don't see that, man. And And I'm not going to say that, how starting 40 games and is going to start 40 games and be great in all of them after starting 5 last year. But I don't think that there's a player in the country that's getting talked about less that's that impactful than Tom Houck. So Tommy, to me, I just think when you talk about just everything he can do, whether it's make shots, whether it is score the ball, whether it's play super efficiently, in a bunch of different spots, whether it's out of the horns or whether it's coming off a screen or whether it's getting big time rebounds like in the Alabama game. He's so versatile, and it's going to be challenging for teams to guard him when he's playing the 3, because if you get him on somebody smaller, he's going to feast. He can slip down to the 4, and if Florida gets stuff out of Zay Brown, Alex Lloyd, I think you'll see that more. And also, by the way, if this wing experiment hurts Florida defensively after 5 or 6 games, this staff is just going to move Tommy to the 4 and figure it out, right? They're not going to be locked into some ideological fantasy that he should be better than, that he has to play at one spot. So that's kind of where I am with Tommy Houck. I think he's going to have an awesome season. I think he's one of the best players in the sport, in period, comma, whatever you want to say about him. It's hard for me to imagine that fails and that he's not either first or second team All-SEC. I also think Alex Condon will be first or second team All-SEC. At the Patreon, Eric Fawcett did a take purge where he explained why he thinks Houck is Florida's best, or Condon is Florida's best player. He disagrees with me that it's Houck. And he didn't want to take anything away from Houck, but he felt like for Condon, going through the NBA draft process was super useful, that he ultimately figured out the handful of things he can do that are going to be integral to him becoming the All-American type player that Fawcett thinks he can be, right? And shoot the ball a little better. He's already a great screener. He's already an outstanding rim runner. He's already a terrific rim protector defender. Can he guard a little better in the post? Yeah. But as like an angle ball screener, as a guy you can actually play through, getting him the ball in those horn sets or at the top, trusted him to make the right reads. He does all that stuff. I think you're going to see him more on the short roll this year, which is something I talked to him at SEC Media Days about. And he said, I'm actually really looking forward to playing a little bit because they ran so many things out of that zoom and gut dribble handoff for Walt that I think the Gators didn't need their big so much in the short roll, but with 2 elite passers in Flynn and Lee, I think you'll see a little more of that for Alex. He'll get a little more action at the rim, make more rim twos. So that's just totally awesome stuff that we haven't seen from Alex in that progression yet. And then, didn't knock down shots in the Illinois game, but did against Florida International. He's going to be a guy who's going to shoot more threes this year, right? And I think we need to know, we need to recognize the fact, I think, that, so Condon is going to have nights where he misses shots. He was 19 of 58 from deep last season. He's going to shoot 100 threes this year. So just be prepared for that. And hopefully he makes 30 of them. And if that happens, then, I think Florida's fine with the 42 extra shots because that's 11 extra makes, and it means he shot better than he shot last year out there. 32%, actually that would be a drop-off. But as long as he makes 30, shooting more, I think you're fine because you're going to get production from other areas with him. Ruben Chenyolu, the last piece, obviously a tremendous anchor at the 5. I think the team's mental I think the competitiveness of Ruben, the spiritual leader, the physicality, he offers a lot of intangible things. He's also, I think, gotten better at his right shoulder. You saw that he could score if he's needed to against LSU, among other games last year. It'll be interesting to see, if there are other games where they call on him a little bit more. He was very good against Maryland in that regard. Like they, had to go to him a little more with Condon hurt, and he went out and scored 10 points and 8 rebounds before fouling out. Really battled with Julian Reese. So Rubin can play against big-time players and hold his own, and I think will continue to do that this year. It's not another guy you'd rather have it starting at the 5 in most campuses on the SEC than Ruben Chenyolu. And then Micah Hanlockton, body looks completely transformed, moving quicker than I've ever seen him in the years I've covered the program. I think going to be a really elite passer, somebody they're going to play through in that horn spot a little more and really trust to make some good reads and use that passing even more. He's not going to look to score a lot. Micah understands his role, but if you can have a 7'1" guy that is a threat to block shots at like a top 150 in the country clip, like Micah is, man, like I just feel like they're getting a real steal out of this dude. And remember, he was 10th in the league in block percentage in the healthy year, and then came back last year, sacrifices that year of eligibility to go win a natty and gets it done. What a privilege to have a guy like that as your sixth man and functionally your fourth big. And then Todd Golden was talking up, Victor Mikic had a really good Euro. It'll be interesting to see Victor Mikic in bye games because Meek can score. He's skilled now. So it's going to be interesting there. Like, what role does he play? CJ Ingram haven't talked about as much as I wanted to. The thing about CJ, I mentioned one of the coaches told me he's the best athlete he's ever coached. Special athlete, NBA level athlete already. They're going to surround him with dudes who can score, right? With Fland, with Kondo, with Hauk, and then whoever the other guy is, whether it's Irby, whether it's Alex, whether it's Zay, he's going to be in a rotation that's in the Evan Mia top 10 this year. And the reason is because CJ Ingram's a guy who's going to go out and he's going to disrupt passing lanes. He's going to create turnovers. He's going to be able to play his ass off for 10, 15 minutes, not worry about fouling, right, and just go compete and not worry about scoring. And that's the perfect developmental track for him. Like, the vision they have for Ingram is why this staff is great. It really is. Like, the fact that they coach CJ, and you could hear the coaches talking through him already when he did media. He was like, I just need to go out there and worry about controlling what I can control and playing hard on defense. And, like, if CJ Ingram takes a shot in a possession, it's probably not a great possession for Florida, But if CJ Ingram takes a transition to or drives to the basket and misses a layup or, proves to be a really good cutter, which is something they're working on with him because he's not used to playing off the ball as much. Even at Montverde, like they wanted to get him downhill a lot as one of their best players. So can he be impactful as a cutter immediately in college? That's hard. But running in transition, creating baskets for himself with steals, tap outs, stuff like that, rebounding, that's how CJ Ingram will make an impact, and I think he'll make a big one. So that's pretty much a roster preview. I don't think Ali Ryu will play. We did see Kovachev make a bucket in one of the scrimmages. It'll be interesting to see, what his role kind of is as you look at bye games. Some fun numbers from Evan Mia, another guy that I like. He had Thomas Hauk as number 10 in the efficiency rankings preseason. Alex Condon in the top 20. He had Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee as two of the top 10 projected playmakers in the country. Florida, the only roster with 2, should be noted. Braden Smith, Bennett Sturt, some other guys on that list, Adam Clark and Seton Hall. Just gives you an idea of how special the playmaking ability on this team could be, even though there's that, you don't have Walter Clayton. Well, we got a lot of guys that can create and make a shot. So that's cool stuff. The schedule, it's hard. it's hard. I think it's harder than Fawcett does. Last year, Fawcett was right, though. Fawcett was right that Florida's schedule ended up not being as hard as I thought it might be. This year, I think it's very tough. I think Arizona's very good. We previewed them at patreon.com. I'll get into them for a few minutes as we close this. Miami, I think, is sneaky good. Duke, UConn, I think TCU is going to be fine. They're going to be on the bubble, but it's still going to be a quad 2-ish, quad 1 game for Florida. Wisconsin will be quad 1. So a lot of quad 1 opportunities for the Gators, I think, in their preseason look. All right, let's do Arizona real quick and then get out of here. Preseason projections for Arizona, they are in the top 20 in KenPom, close to the top 10 offensively. Jaden Bradley, one of the more underrated players in college basketball, actually named the most underrated at CBS Sports, is their point guard. He's an outstanding player. Many of you will remember him from Alabama. Jaden's not a great shooter. Shot 32% last year from 3, didn't take a ton of shots. But he's a nice creator. He's pretty automatic at the free throw line, 85% or so in his career. And he's active defensively, a good defender, tough. He's 6'3", but 205 and chiseled. The thing you're going to notice about Arizona is that Florida can overwhelm you with their size and physicality, and Arizona will not be overwhelmed. That will be probably the first thing that you kind of notice. Anthony Del Orso is the other guard. One of the other guards. He is an absolute sniper from beyond the arc. Shot 41% last year. Can really knock down shots. I think in that regard might take more. Should definitely take more threes this year with Caleb Love. Their gunner gone. The guy they brought in to replace Caleb Love is a freshman named Braden Burry. He's a top 30 freshman. It's going to take Braden Burry some time. Like, they're going to be a little more reliant on Jaden Bradley offensively than I'd want to be on a guy who kind of had a 113 offensive rating and wasn't particularly high usage. So even gives you a little idea that, like, sometimes there's guys that have like a 113, 115 O rating, and it's really because they're asked to do a ton. Jaden's is low, and he still wasn't asked to do a lot in terms of scoring. So if they have to rely on him in the backcourt, that could be interesting. But I think eventually, and maybe even very quickly, Braden Burris will be pretty special on that end, I would say. And so when you kind of evaluate like their backcourt, it's not as good as like Florida's is, right? But it has the potential to kind of go toe-to-toe with the Gators for sure. There's no Carter Bryant on this team, like that elite defensive stopper that Carter Bryant kind of evolved into that role. But I don't want to say that like there's not any great defenders on this team, because that's just not true. I think Toby Owaka is one of the better defenders in the country. Very efficient rim 2 guy. Todd Golden isolated him as being a guy who he's very impressed by when you watch the film. Just super efficient, understands his role, good shot blocker. Plays bigger than the 6'8" that he plays at. So physical, talented kid, and he'll be a load for Kondo and Hauk out there. Then Koa Pete could get some Koa versus Tommy type stuff that NBA scouts dream about. He's a top 15 freshman. I love Koa Pete. I think he's going to be absolutely sensational for them. Can't imagine him not starting. He's 6'8", 230. He's also 20, so it's a little different than a lot of freshmen. They have 2 20-year-old freshmen because they brought in the wing Ivan Karchinkov, who we talked about on the Patreon from Bayern Munich. It's a European who could really help. Koa Pete is he's got a brother in the NFL, Andres Pete. He won 4 FIBA gold medals playing for Team USA. He's actually played for Tommy Lloyd on Team USA, so he has familiarity there that I think is going to help him a lot and do him some justice. He's got a very high basketball IQ. He's a good passer. A very versatile kid. A chiseled mound of rebound who is not going to be afraid of Florida's physicality. He's really going to compete on the glass. He's a guy I like And then Awaka is going to be a guy who's very familiar with he's going to be a guy who I think is very familiar with Boogie Flan. Growing up in the Bronx, there's two guys that played each other a lot. So Koa Pete will have played with Boogie on Team USA. Toby Awaka will have played with Boogie. These teams are going to be familiar with one another. They play a lot alike. All of that's going to be really fun. What's up to Peyton Mitchell, who said he's pumped for hoops? Like, yeah, I can't believe it's been 7 months to San Antonio either, man. That's what I said at the top of the show. It's incredible. Can't finish the Arizona chat. Again, go to the Patreon and subscribe if you want a longer preview of the Arizona game. This is going to be one of the best front courts in the country. It's going to be Arizona. They're going to be one of the best front courts Florida plays all year. Maltias Krivas is kind of the guy that is super interesting to me. He only played about 10 games last year, got hurt. Lithuanian, was projected as a first-round NBA draft pick. Obviously got injured, showed up in a boot at the UCLA game in mid-December when they were getting ready to open league play. Never played again. Sorry, it wasn't league play. I guess that would have been playing an old Pac-12 foe before league play. And that was it, right? He's a special player, man. I mean, he's big. He's physical. He guards without fouling. He rebounds. The battle with him and Chenyalu and Condon is going to be really neat, really special to watch. Like, that front court battle may decide the game, especially if Braden Burris kind of struggles in his first college game. The guy to watch, asterisk, I guess, would be Karchinkov. This could come down to whether Del Orso and Karchinkov make shots, right? And then whether Klavsar makes shots and Boogie and Xavier make shots. Because I think the front court battle is going to be pretty damn close to a stalemate. The one player in this game that nobody but Florida has is Tommy Houck. He is the guy who can do a little everything, and he's got the experience that Koa Pete lacks when you kind of look at two guys that can hurt you in a lot of different ways on each roster. So I think Florida's older. They're going to be playing a road game. Basically, the Arizona fans are out in Vegas in full force. I was a late scratch for Vegas. Not feeling great. But, bottom line is I think it's a game Florida can win. Wouldn't be stunned if they lose it. I'm not going to come on a pod and hammer the Gators if they lose. But I think Florida will win. I think they're 5-7 points better than Arizona. And that's what will show up tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed this season preview. I know it's a little different than our over-under format that we usually have. Appreciate all you guys. Remember, patreon.com/FloridaBBHour. Subscribe. Really proud to be part of the Stadium and Gale Network. Thanks to those fellas. Go Gators. Keep attacking closeouts.